I was reading an article about a developer in Sherbrooke. They went to the city 17 times. It was a big one. I think it was Cousteau, 17 times. And in the article, someone from the city was saying, we are proud to have worked with the developer to bring him to where we wanted him to be from a project perspective. It took 17 iterations, but that was the good thing to do. I'm like, do you know how much that cost?
And how delayed?
And that was because he was able to do so.
Yeah.
Not everybody can go through 17 iterations. So we need to make the process more predictable for the one building. And we need also to accept as a society that the rent will increase, and we have to work on decreasing the cost. If we don't do those three things, the reality is that in 2 years, when we meet again, the crisis will still be there.
Hello, and welcome back to the Very Real Effect podcast, a show dedicated to real estate investing right here in Quebec. And today, as one of the, if not the last episode of the year, it's a pleasure and an honor to be back with my three friends from last year so we can do a year recap and what's coming for 2024. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get into it, I just want to remind everyone, thank you for subscribing to the podcast. Share it with a friend who could benefit from this conversation, especially this conversation, because we were starting and it's going to be jam-packed. You want to share it with someone who's going to be benefiting from this conversation. Now, as we get started, I want to already thank my three guests, and maybe we could just do a quick roundtable to introduce ourselves. And before we do that, go back to last year's episode and watch it at exactly this time of the year. We already did this, so you can kind of, compare and see where we're at and how accurate we were in our predictions. So first off, please introduce yourself, Alex.
Thank you for having me back. Alex Rossi, president of Bello Apartments. And we were listening to last year's recap. There were a lot of mistakes made in there, a lot of learning that we did this year. And I couldn't be more excited to start off 2024 on a fresh note where we're coming out of this a lot stronger with a lot more knowledge and a lot more, passion through the next year.
Absolutely.
So pleasure to be back with you guys. Stephanie Kowalew, founder of Effet Papillon Financement. I'm excited for the year to come. I'm excited to speak about all the opportunities that we're going to foresee in 2024. So thanks for having me back.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me as well. Uriel Bigot, founder of La Fabrique, real estate developer, real estate investor. The beauty about next year is that we know what happened this year. So we can't say that we didn't know. Nobody knows about the future, but when you look at the past, it's kind of hard not to see where things will be going. So next year is going to be extremely interesting to look at and to work in.
So in order to learn from the past to see better the future and anticipate, it's important to take a few minutes of retrospection of what did we do in 2023? I mean, the end of the year is literally here in a couple hours. How about maybe starting with Stephanie? What did you do this year? What did you see? And just give us a bit of an update on what you were up to.
So I was buying a lot this year, so probably the worst timing in history to keep buying. So in terms of what I saw, I mean, it was very predictable in terms of the high interest rate. We saw it coming. I think that to me, it was a lot of readjustment, a lot of new regulations, a lot of changes, being quick on your feet. And I kind of love chaos. So I know that's where I'm really, really performing. So for me, it was a very exciting year. That's where clients needed us the most. So it was really fun to see people just grow in difficult time. I think that really builds character. So that was super exciting. And also taking advantage of the ups and downs and the volatility, which we already spoke about last year. We saw it. Now there's lesser of a volatility, but it's still there. But yeah, I think it was a very exciting year and a lot of learning to be made in those years.
Yeah. I agree with you. And if I have to describe 2023, it will be in three phases. The first was really the shock, right? Seeing the rate increase, not really knowing where the market will go, the volatility, as you mentioned. The second was the acceptance. It's here. It's here to stay. We had to adjust. And the third phase is actually where we are now, where we are taking advantage of those situations. The 2023 has been chaotic. I mostly did refinancing this year, not buying more. I advanced on my existing project, working on getting the permits. But most of all, it was really about changing the way I approach the market. I used to work with some investors who had a different approach toward the market because their expectation was based on what we used to have. So it was really an opportunity for me to work toward new investors who now understand the new reality of the market. That's mostly what I did in 2023.
Thanks for sharing, man.
I think this year was a year of negotiating and kind of dealing with CMHC and fighting with banks and going back and forth and corresponding and trying to just get all parties on board to cooperate for certain files to work. And we kind of, started files and then policies would change throughout the year, which was a bit of a disappointment. But at the same time, it, made us realize, well, let's just be a lot more prudent and cautious in the way we underwrite our files going forward and kind of put in our pro forma as additional conservative metrics or go in with even higher rates so that we don't get an underwriter that gets back to us and says, well, this is the new rate and your file doesn't work. You need to inject an extra, $500K of capital. So I think it was a year that taught a lot of us how to be very diplomatic and cooperative with banks and CMHCs and builders, but also taught us how to be, like I said, more prudent and more cautious and have a bit more of like a plan B, a plan C if the first attempt didn't go as planned, which I think a lot of investors were, or a lot of investors, dealt with this year.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear all of you describe it. We all went through a different experience. And actually in my case, I just feel like it was a year of kind of going back to basics of underwriting, of what to focus on property types and project. And what I mean by that is that before 2023, we had a fairly easy market. I mean, you'd buy anything and you were making money. Whereas this year with the higher rates, it made everything a little bit more challenging. And I don't want to say like the heydays of real estate kind of came to a stop, at least for a short period, but it pushed us to go back to the importance of conservative underwriting. Fine, there is that. And then also on my side personally, we did, I don't want to say we were less active in real estate. Like we pushed projects like crazy, including the development in Saint Jerome. But I have to say that I really enjoyed taking a lot more time with my kids. And I do real estate a lot for them because I want to leave them a legacy. And that actually feels good, and how we're reorganizing a little bit in our lives. And what does that mean? So I could talk about the Saint Jerome project for a long time. I mean, we've gone through a big increase in size, like roughly 16 units to about 60. And what that means for the future is exciting. And that all happened in 2023. So not only going back to basics and also conservative-based growth. I'll just leave it at that. Now, yep.
I want to add something as well is we went through a phase before 2023 where, like you mentioned, anybody could make money in real estate because the rates were extremely low. And that also brought some challenge because some people got into the game for the wrong reason, right? There were so many people who were in for a quick win, when in reality, real estate has never really been about short-term gain. Even when you flip houses or when you flip condos, you should have a long-term plan. And now what I'm seeing now, like you mentioned, is back to the basics. Now people have to really take the time to ask themselves, why am I investing in real estate and what am I looking out of it? Am I trying to just build quick? Am I trying to leave my job and live off real estate? Or am I trying to use this for a long-term, wealth building strategy, or even to preserve the wealth I already have? So I think it's a good thing that we had all those challenges because it forced all of us to rethink why we are doing this and what is our real strategy. So being narrow on the strategy, being focused on the approach, and really being okay with the fact that the short, quick flip gain is no longer what's going to be the norm in the market.
Yeah, and I like what you said in terms of going back to the basics. It's all about fundamentals. If you look at like everything that we're going through, it is so predictable. It's easier in hindsight to just point out, but we're going back to fundamentals, which is every 10 years we kind of have to go back to, and it's fair, and it's exciting. Those who have like really good values, like they're going to be fine.
Yeah, I agree.
because realistically, like interest rates at 2.5% is not normal. It is not close to the long-term average, and more the 375 to 450, 475 is more of the long-term average. So, I mean, we're just going back to normality right now, and we have to get back used to it. Is that, as you said, like we saw a lot of people coming in the market, like 2017 and even before that, like 18, 19. Remember like how crazy it was and how rates were low. I hate to say, but in a way it's almost a good thing because it's kind of skimmed off the market and there's a lot of people that have dropped off, and it's great because there's only the serious ones left. Yay!
Let me piggyback on that, because I think for your audience, it might be worth to explain which rates we are referring to, because honestly, for me, this is the perfect moment, and I'm gonna explain why. I'm in a phase in my life where I'm still growing on the portfolio level with my partners, with investors, and I'm mostly buying with partnership in companies. And in those companies, we do multifamily. And the multifamily rates, so based on GOC, on CMB, are kind of low right now as we speak.
It's coming down.
The GOC is around 3.5 right now, right? So when you add a little bit spread from the bank, you're going to get a rate around 4.5, which is a decent rate when you think about it, because the two that we used to have was not normal. So if you're trying to build multifamily, or if you're trying to buy multifamily, you can get a good rate. The challenge is that banks are still hesitating, and I'm sure you're seeing this a lot, Stephanie. They're not sure that rate's still going to be the same in 3 or 6 months. So it's really hard for them to give you a long-term outside overview of what kind of rate they will apply in 2 or 3 months. So that's why they're still hesitating a little bit. But when you look at it, as of today, the rate when it comes to multifamily buying a building is low. Now, on the other side, the rate for Monsieur, Madame, tout le monde who want to buy a duplex, a triplex, or a condo, which is based on Bank of Canada rate, is high. But that's an extremely good thing, because I'm trying to buy. My wife wanted us to buy some more properties on our personal name for our kids. And when the rates are high like that, there's really not a lot of people in the market. Everybody want to sit on the sideline. So when you take a step back, you realize that having a rate which is high is a good thing, because you have less competition. And this is also good because the sellers, they know it. So because they know it, they will be a little bit more flexible. They're not there yet, but they will get there. And this means if you're trying to buy, you almost have to wish the rate to stay high when it comes to Bank of Canada, which is actually my position. I want them to stay high. I want them to keep increasing them, because the second you're able to go through that first hurdle, that obstacle of the financing and secure financing, you almost have like an edge compared to the sellers, because there's not much buyers around, right? So right now, I think it's a really good time. If you have the finances, if you have that disposable income, you are able to support debt, it's a really good time to buy.
Yeah. Those who were cautious and they just kept on piling up, like now is your time to shine for sure.
For those who are liquid.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. It's a great time.
Yep. So that's my outcome.
What about for you, Alex?
I just wanted to comment on MLI Select. We spoke a lot about it in the last 2 years. I think it's going to be this program's birthday in the upcoming months, 2 years, and if I'm not mistaken, beginning of March. So I was reflecting on that a lot this year, because it, in a sense, saved the Canadian market. It did contribute a lot to, in a way, making housing affordable, because we are still building to a certain extent, and we're coping with higher rates. But it did two things, in my opinion. It further inflated the costs or the pricing of multifamily assets, just because you're extending on a 50-year period with a debt service of 1.1. But at the same time, the benefit of it all was, as we saw the highest rates in the last 22 years, it facilitated refis for people who are using MLI. It facilitated new construction. So it was like it came in, it saved the Canadian multifamily housing market, but it simultaneously pushed up the price. So it's interesting to digest, like, going forward, what this program will do to the market, and how will it continue to evolve. Will they add different categories to this program to further expand their mission to make housing affordable, energy efficient, and accessible? Perhaps there'll be some other category to be confirmed. I don't know, maybe like an immigration
even more environmental factors,
more different I guess missions or goals
Criterias
of the government that they'll be adding. So I'm always trying to be as up to date with where we're going with all this as possible to make decisions of how we can better position ourselves to build and buy in the future. And I just wanted to comment on that MLI Select, where it's evolved a lot this year, and it did, really frustrate me a few times when they've kind of threw a couple curveballs, like when suddenly there's an internal qualifying rate and I've locked millions of dollars already, and I've had my rate and I want you to use my rate and you can't do that. So anyway, I think overall it's done a lot more help to Canadian investors and Canadian builders, but there have been a couple, irritants with the program.
I just don't think it inflated value. I think it helped preserve values. Like, I don't know if it inflated the values. I just think they just remained where they were without collapsing, which is good.
It helps stabilize.
Right. So but yeah, it's an incredible program that's going to be bound to like evolve. And I think that's also was from somebody who corresponds a lot with CMHC. The way that the approach is in terms of the new rules are a bit different now. It's a bit more, I'm going to call it aggressive, where here's the changes, this is when it's happening, and that's it. And now sometimes it's like, it's not even, there's no deadlines, it just evolves as we go. So it's very hard to predict and work, but then by doing that, you kind of understand where they're going with all of this. And I mean, fundamentally, I think they've run the program in a way that I think they're very cautious, and they're trying to stop certain aspects of real estate that are not necessarily good for Canadians who just want to be housed at a price that makes sense for them. So,
and I think also the real metrics for success, the real judgment day for that program will be in 5 years or in 10 years when people start refinancing after having done the first financing with MLI Select. Because now it's one thing. I have some new construction. I understand the logic behind extending your amortization on 50 years. I understand the SCR of 1.1. But on older building, that can be extremely dangerous.
Correct.
Right? So we're talking about being cautious, about having back to the basic, having those pro forma. But now you are basically using you are operating a building where you don't have much meat left on the bone based on that type of financing. So I think we will have to see, because MLI became the new norm. I mean, right now, there's almost nobody who's still doing regular financing. There's
the
very
numbers
few.
just don't work.
It doesn't work, right?
You can't finance or refi without the program.
Everybody's going MLI, but the real question would be what happened in 5 years or 10 years when time comes to refi, what kind of amortization they will be getting in 5 or 10 years. So I'm really looking forward to see what will happen in 5 years. I understand why they did all that, because we are at a critical spot in Canada right now. We are bringing so much people every year, 500,000. We have a deficit when it comes to making new kids and putting new people in the job market. The economy will be slowing down if we don't bring in that immigration. But at the same time, we're already lacking housing for people who are already here. So if we do not build more, we're going to have a bigger crisis in our hands. So they have to take action to help us build more. But it has to make sense financially. Otherwise, nobody will build. And I think MLI was one of the reasons why they push MLI to help the construction. But I think they will have to do more if they want us to really resolve the housing crisis.
So why don't we talk a little bit about what do you guys think that the country would need, or that CMHC would need, or that builders would need to kind of accomplish that goal, build 3.5 million apartments by 2030, according to CMHC? What are the variables, or what are the metrics that we all need for that to be possible? And here's what I think. I think we definitely need a little bit of help on rates. I see we're probably going to need about 100 basis points of reduction, somewhere back in the mid to high threes, to really bang this out and get the ball rolling by building. I think we're also going to need more help here in Quebec with the provincial tax on new builds. We've seen Ontario waive that 8% amount. We're not there yet here in Quebec, but touch wood, hopefully will be there at some point. What do you guys think about
I find this,
other variables or things that would help kind of
I find that's
solve Canada's housing crisis?
A really, really good question. Is just that right now, when you ask that question, we talked about what the CMHC can do. And for me to answer that question, CMHC is just one of the layers. And I just want to add to on top and on the bottom of that is that with what I'm seeing and being boots on the ground and meeting with cities for developments, what I do see is that, yeah, there's financing condition that need to be improved. And as you said, there's also costs, i.e. taxes, that would be helpful for us if they were removed. Now, another thing is working with cities is not easy. It takes a lot of time. And this is where, on top of the financing solutions that need to be brought, facilitating the process of approval to me would be a huge gain, because not only would we be able to save money, but be able to go faster and to meet some of the objectives that are set, where, as you said, like 3.5 million more dwellings by 2030. In order to do this, we need to catch up what we haven't done in the past, and we need to be able to increase every year. And the red tape in working with municipalities, to me, is a huge one. Another one is the social acceptability. Like we've all heard this year of a beautiful, I think it was like 230 unit development that was going to happen next to a RAM station in the west side of the island of Montreal. And it was canceled because single family home owners next door didn't want a 4 or 5 story building as neighbor. And we all say we want densification, but it's well, not in my backyard. And so there needs to be some financial incentives. There needs to be some shortcuts and ease in terms of project approvals, working with the city, but also us as a society, we need to accept that, yeah, our neighborhoods are going to change and we need to go high instead of go further. And when we are really able to have this conversation, will we start to have solutions to tackle that problem?
I think you touched a very good point in acceptabilité sociale, because that's a relatively new concept in development, where it's almost like cities don't even need mayors, because you could be a neighbor and just basically run the development process. So it's like, I think they're seeing the limits of too much involvement. And realistically, if you really agree with the project, are you going to go and cause trouble and fight because you really agree with it? Like, no, I think so. That whole question that was introduced, I think back in 2018, is bound to evolve huge, because it's a big problem in development.
Mm-hmm. Comes down to 3 things: risk, revenue, and cost. The only reason why someone invests, because we cannot build if there's no investment, right? All our investments, either our own money or money that we raise, there's an expectation of return, and our return is impacted by the risk. And you guys mentioned it. If you will buy a land and then you have no certainty that the neighbor will roadblock the project, or it will take longer, well, you will hesitate to invest. So I agree with you. The risk is one of the elements, but I think the biggest element is really the revenue and the cost, meaning we have to accept that housing price will increase in Canada. And that's just the reality. It's a hard conversation to have. I understand, especially here in Quebec, we are one of the provinces where people pay the less for when it comes to rent. Mm-hmm. I was living in Paris. I was paying 1,500 euros, which is almost 2,000 Canadian dollars, for a 500 square foot, not even in Paris.
Like, how many years ago?
By the way, actually, that's true.
10 years ago.
That was actually 10 years ago.
Yeah, welcome to...
We have to accept that, because if everything costing more, right, and building is costing more, if there's no return, people will not build. So the question now is, how do we increase the price while still giving a chance to families to have a decent place where they can live without having their livelihood being affected? Mm-hmm. And that's where maybe the government have to step in and say, you know what, maybe we'll give you an extra $200 because you have a certain revenue and because we want you to have that mixity, mixity we were talking about in the car before getting here. So we have to be able to generate serious revenue. Otherwise, there's no return. If there's no return, nobody will invest. If we have to build 3.5 million housing in the next 7 years, it has to be massive money injected in the system, and that money expect a return. Like, let's call a spade a spade.
And no one's going to manage apartments and take on risk and do renovations and correspond with CMHC
For
and
free.
do their accounting each year and do everything that comes with you for a minimal return on their money.
Exactly.
No one is going to cough up $1 million and go through the process
Exactly.
of doing this with no return and have all that onus on you and then be caught with a rent control if it's not a new construction. And no one's going to want to take risks to raise their rent by only 2.5 when insurance premiums are up 8 each year due to
And when cities
global
are increasing taxes
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
So
5% this year in
Yes.
Montreal?
So
No,
the
you're
city-
absolutely right.
the
It's
city-
like the hot potato, but it's not to be put in the developer's court. I think that's just irresponsible for any entity that governs us, and that needs to change. I think subsidizing is a very good option because you go to the source, you go to the person who generates the income, and you have access to all that information. Us, if we set an affordable unit, you could be making $150,000 a year. You signed up for my apartment, I'll give it to you.
And we will do our part. We are part of the solution, but we cannot do it alone. So first of all, we need to be able to get more revenue without being seen like the black sheep who are just trying to make money out of somebody else's back. We are taking a lot of risk. Like if I ask all of us around the table how many hours you spend on one file, it's a lot of work. So we have to be able to generate revenue.
And then you're taxed as if it were passive income.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah,
Let's
passive.
get
This
taxed
is-
at
this
the
has
full
nothing
tax
to do with
bracket because
passive.
we just sit back and
Yeah,
just
yeah,
the
yeah.
money comes in.
It comes in
Yeah.
easy.
So that's the first. Second thing is the cost as well. So building has been costing more and more and more. We are in a good phase right now because there's less construction. Prices are coming down, so that's a good thing.
It's more competitive.
But at the same time, what I meant by reducing the cost is maybe we will have to build the same unit with the same rent, but with a smaller size.
Yeah.
So culturally, we have to accept that the large 2-bedroom with 1,200 square foot might no longer be the norm, and that a family might have to live in a 800 square foot 2-bedroom apartment. We might have to accept the fact that families will have to accept smaller unit because let's be honest, we will not build bigger, larger, and cheaper. The math doesn't add up. So unless we're able to remove, at least reduce or make it predictable from a risk perspective for the developers, unless we can have a path toward a better revenue generated by those assets to increase the profitability, unless we can have also a visibility on how we can reduce the cost, people will not build more. That's just what it is. So if we can collectively work on those three things, making the risk more manageable, right? It makes no sense for me for somebody to go in. I was reading an article about a developer in Sherbrooke. They went to the city 17 times. It was a big one. I think it was Cousteau, 17 times. And in the article, someone from the city was saying, we are proud to have worked with the developer to bring him to where we wanted him to be from a project perspective. It took 17 iterations, but that was the good thing to do. I'm like, do you know how much that costs?
And how delayed?
And that was because he was
the
able to do so.
Yeah.
Not everybody can go through 17 iterations. So we need to make the process more predictable for the one building. And we need also to accept as a society that the rent will increase, and we have to work on decreasing the cost. If we don't do those three things, the reality is that in 2 years, when we meet again, the crisis will still be there.
But I see this also as an opportunity to be a type of innovation in the construction space. We've seen the same type of construction done for the last, I couldn't put a number on it, but I was reading about CMHC now approving prefab homes in terms of the loan. So maybe there's going to be more of like a disruptor in the space of how do we build faster or cheaper or
both,
utilize different methods to either get smaller units that are more functional, but also the cost, or use different methods to bring that cost overall down, which improves financing, builds more doors, and solves Canada's housing crisis.
And I to rebound on what both of you said, this recently in Toronto, I attended an event where there was an exhibitor who was showing some, I think it was 350 or 400 square foot units where they had developed kind of I don't want to say a 2-stage, it was on one floor. But anyways, they had developed method to really be able to maximize the space, the use, and the versatility of, basically the 2 main rooms. And I find it kind of corresponds to what you said earlier about, as a society, getting used to, we're going to basically live in smaller average unit size because we can't really push the price that much. And so we need to be thinking about this. And as a developer, I mean, I'm always looking for new ideas. And when I saw this, it was like, oh, okay, let's really think about that. And as you said, Alex, from a technology point of view and building point of view, we have leaps and bounds to go forward.
Innovation is usually driven by money, right?
Mm-hmm.
You need capital if you want to create innovation.
Capital or laziness?
that too. So why people are investing in startups? Because they see the potential 20x, 40x return. You don't have those in real estate.
Right.
You do not have those in real estate. So innovation comes with people believing in the fact that they can get high return and taking that risk. If we don't make this an environment where people are comfortable taking risk, innovation will not happen in real estate. You mentioned this earlier in the car.
Yeah.
There's no much company, a construction company that do have an R&D department.
There's none.
They don't have that. They don't have that money to invest in it. So, and I think we also as a society has to come together and understand that we are all part of the solution, because the mentality now is that those developers, they're making that big money, they are crooks, they are making money on the back of other people. But that extra money that has to be made has to be there so that we can finance those kind of innovation, right? So I think it really has to do with a cultural change. We have to change the culture and not being working one against each other, but together.
100%. And it's also all the medias that are portraying, like, if you look at the margins in new construction, I keep track of all the reposition and les syndicats de faillite. Right now, all we're seeing is new construction, multi-unit, that are being repossessed.
Wow.
Like, so the margins are obviously, like, you don't look at how if it was stressed at a 3% interest rate when you built, like, obviously, like, there's just cautiousness and prudence, but everything that I'm seeing on a repositioning side is new construction. So the margin are nothing to barely. So if I hear things like the clause in the Régie du Logement, la clause F, it's really necessary to keep it, because for the first 5 years, your taxes, you're not sure what's going to happen, your cost, I'm seeing it's almost normal to have 25% increase in costs when you're done. So if you were off on the rate and you were off on your cost, where are you getting that money back? Like, the margins there's no room for innovation, no room for that. So it's either going to be the combination of two industries that are going to come hand in hand. But right now, it's got to come from the technological side who meets real estate, really. And you guys are the best for that. Don't you guys have backgrounds in technologies?
That's why we need money to do so.
We need you
guys. That's
guys.
really what it is.
Now, for the time that we have left, I'd really like to focus a little bit on, no one has a crystal ball here. And if you do, you're in the wrong room, or really let us know. What do we see coming for 2024? The 2024 starts in a couple hours. I'm not asking you to take a risk and make a prediction, and we're going to hold you accountable to it by cutting your two hands off. But what do you see coming? What are you focusing on? And what are your objectives?
Interest rates will go to zero.
Okay.
Like this, in a microsecond.
Sure.
Completely wrong. I don't know. I've learned one thing. I don't speculate on rates anymore. So it's hard for me to predict going forward. But what I do see happening this year, and I do believe inflation is trending where it should be and coming down. So I think that'll be a breath of fresh air for, costs, labor costs, cost of materials, hopefully have an influence on rates as we get through Q3, 4 of 2024. And that's the prediction I'll make, but I could be completely wrong.
No, we'll see.
Smooth sailing. For those who are still alive in real estate, I think it's going to be just something that's going to grow how it's supposed to grow. I think there's going to be, the margins are with the sub trades are not going to be as crazy as it was. So I think it's really, I don't think I'm very optimistic. Like, I'm just very realistic on what's to come. Obviously, there's going to be companies who are no longer going to be there. There's going to be, and honestly, some of the companies that I'm seeing right now, I genuinely love their product and loved what they were doing, but we're seeing the fight come their way, and it's sad. But also the job market is gonna be seeing a big shift right now. It's been too good for one side versus the other, so I think it's great also for acceptabilité sociale. It's bound to shift more in the developer's side. And it's not a matter of just pulling la couverte d'un bord ou de l'autre. It's about meeting in the middle. And I think that those people who are going to be able to really stop being on their end and the other and just rise together, there's going to be really beautiful things. And I'm very hopeful for what's to come.
When it comes to multifamily, the beauty is that there is a monopoly from CMHC, right? Which is an extending hand of arm of the government. So I believe they will have to manipulate the market to bring the rate down when it comes to CMB, GOC. They will have to bring the rate to a point where it makes sense for developers to develop more. Because let's face it, the shortage that we have in the housing market will not be compensated by renovating a couple of units here and there. We have to build. So that's my prediction. They will have to work on to do the magic, bring the rate down when it comes to, it's already going down actually, and they will continue to do so. They will continue to innovate when it comes to policies to help builders build more. We have already seen it even here in Quebec. They came up with a plan d'urbanisme where they were basically telling the cities, you guys will have to allow higher density, right? That's part of what I'm predicting for next year. And I think that will create a rebirth in the construction market. It will create more transaction. People will start selling more land because they will see an opportunity to exit, and that will bring in new players who have the real good values for that type of market, who will build more. So I think the construction will start again next year. On the residential side, on the personal side, duplex, triplexes, I think price will go a little bit down until June, until the point where they will start dropping the Bank of Canada rates. And when that happens, hell will break loose again, because there are so many people on the sideline just waiting for the rate to drop, and they will come back on the market, buy, and that will drive again the price up. And so it's tricky. They have to reduce the rate, but they can't do it too fast because they would just be shooting themselves in the arm if they do so. So that's what I'm seeing for next year: more transaction, more construction, more project.
It's interesting to hear this, because one thing that I see coming is actually a lot of consolidation within the industry, and at every level of the real estate, whether it's, starting with the financials. And it was a couple of months ago that wasn't it RBC trying to buy HSBC and try to really buy their mortgage service side. Then on the construction, as you said, like, not only is it harder for companies because they don't have as much demand, but there's also a lot of tradesmen are at a point in their age cycle where they're retiring, and some of them have said, I'm going to go 2 years early because right now it's just too hard and I don't want to do it. And I haven't found a young entrepreneur who wants to take over my business. So some of those companies die, or some companies get gobbled by the bigger ones who've had the capital, who've been able to, while they were successful, eat up all the small ones. And then, in the trades and in development, construction, and so on and so forth. And so again, like, we don't really, we focus a lot on the interest rate, but we marry the property. We just date the interest rate. Interest rates will change, but there is one thing though, is that as soon as they start decreasing, I do agree with all of you that it's going to start to be mayhem, and a lot of buyers are going to come back and prices are going to go back up. And, whether it's going to be this summer, next summer, next fall, no one really knows. But as soon as rates start to come down, the market will go hot again.
Say that again. You did the interest rate and you marry the property.
You marry. Did I say the opposite? You
no,
marry. I think you marry the property because you go long.
Rate.
It's like your wife. You go for 40 years or until the end.
Oh, so you have an expiration date with your wife?
No, and then
it's a 50-year amortization.
No.
Is that gaining value or losing value?
It's a long-term hold. But then the interest rates. You get to change and reassess every 5 years. So you marry the property, but you date the interest rates.
I like that.
And so sometimes people focus way too much on the interest rate. And I'm just going to say it. Like, I remember even 2 years ago with other investors, they're like, you're crazy. You should always go on a variable rate. This is stupid. If you look at a 40-year cycle, the variable always outperforms.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what I do.
Except I only invest for a 5-year term at a time. And when rates were at 175, I didn't really want to protect myself against the downside because I was cash flowing well. I just wanted to protect against interest rates going up, which at 175, they could only go up. And so now people are like, oh, how are you doing on your cash flow? It's like, actually, it's improved my cash flow because I was on a fixed rate and my rents have increased. So I have the same payment all the time. Yeah. And so
until you come to renew.
Until I come to renewal. Yeah, but at least I didn't suffer from the every 3 months increase.
Now let's look at that. I actually believe those who went through the hardship of the last month will do well next year. Contrary to those who haven't been going through that hardship because they have a low interest rate, they will be the one perishing in the next 6 months. That's the reality of it. It's like when a landlord does not increase the rent, he's not really doing a favor to the tenant.
Or to himself.
Or to definitely not to
definitely
himself,
not to himself.
But not even to the tenant, because the day that tenant has to move out, he's going to have that shock.
Yeah.
So personally, I went from a mortgage on my personal residence from $1,600 to $2,300. It stinks. But the reality is I went through it. And even if they increase again the rate in January or next year, I already went through the hardship.
Yep.
I know people, they're currently sleeping on a 2% rate, and it's going to hurt them really bad when they renew next year. So it's a different philosophy.
I agree with that. And one of the things that I realized the most is also having different maturities. Like that's one of the basic things they teach in finance. But having a building who comes due every year, if it's a bad year, next year, it's going to be a better year. So I think having that, say not to have all your maturities at the same time, very, very important.
That's a very good point.
I agree with that. When you kind of ladder the duration or you ladder the, renewals of each of the mortgages, is just you're kind of bound to a 5 or 10-year term with a lot of the CMHC products. They should almost start introducing like
3 years?
7-year rate
or
lock
7-year.
They do it on an exceptional basis, on a case-by-case basis. They will allow a shorter term, but right now the 1 year is so much more expensive than the 5 years, but they'll allow it. So it's an exception you need to ask.
So we have a couple of minutes left before we wrap this up. 2024, what else comes to your mind? In terms of, I'd like to talk a little bit about project, and if we can just do a quick roundtable, and I'll start. Like on my side, we have 3 ongoing projects. The 60-unit development in Saint Jerome, which we're not sure exactly on how many units. We're still waiting for some very important reports and working with the city, and that's a major one. We have another little one. Well, now it's little because we're only adding 2 floors in Verdun, and that's fun. And on our side, with Rosalie, my partner, we will continue to focus on redevelopment and on buying new builds. We've just kind of shifted and pivoted a little bit, and we're really excited by that. And I have to say, I feel, I don't want to say blessed, but I really like the development process. It's hard. I've gotten more white hair, but I've also been taking a lot of pleasure at it. And this is where my objective is to build communities, is to build housing for immigrants, because this country greatly needs it. And I really want to keep pushing in that direction so that 15 years from now, I can go back on some of those streets and be like, look at those families who've settled here. How much have they contributed to our nation?
I agree with you. Actually, I lost mine to that process. I was referring to my hair. So... same thing. I mean, I think when you are a real estate investor, you start with those duplexes, triplexes, then you buy multifamily. You go through reprise de logement, aka rénoviction, whatever you want to name it. But at some point, you get to the point where you wanna have speed, and also you want to have a better control of what you do, and that's where new development is so good and so great. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm working on a couple projects I can't talk about yet because they haven't been confirmed. But the main thing for me will be to, I submitted a permit to the city for my 340 unit at Lévis. So we should be getting the permit in January, February. Have to go through one last round of raising money and start the construction. So that's going to be my main focus next year.
Yeah. I like the word you used before, consolidating. I think that's it. That was my word this weekend, consolidating. And so I think that for sure is going to be 2024. In terms of building communities, there's a specific street near where I live that I'm like, that's the next street that's going to go. You know, remember when Wellington was like, oh, the street of the world? Everybody was kind of like a bit... not in full agreement, but anyway, there's a street that I think I want to focus on as an investment perspective. But for the more shorter term, I think consolidating is going to be my word.
For me, I think 2024 will be a year of kind of making sure everything is running as planned, digging deep, crunching the numbers to make sure that, you know, what we submitted on our pro formas are really matching the revenue we're getting to ensure that we have that proper debt service coverage. And we've completed 96 doors this year with Bello Apartments. We have another 32 that's in the same neighborhood. So we're looking to expand in that, and always open to different partnerships and investors. So that's going to be kind of the project of 2024.
Wow, very encouraging. Good job, guys.
Thanks.
Good job. I like to think that, you know, us around the table and all the many other ones who are out there are actually driven by making a contribution to solving the crisis, the housing crisis that this country has, because we all know, like, making money is a little part of it, and the more it goes, the lesser that part becomes important, and it's more about the contribution that we can make. So thank you to all of you, and we will do it again next year, number one. And just to finish on, you guys have something else you'd like to add? One thing that's important is that for all those who are listening, you might be seeing this and say, oh, look at these 4 people. Like, they make it sound easy and stuff. But what you don't see are the sleepless nights, the working till 10:30 at night, or if not later, and the wondering, am I making a big mistake with this? And keep going and keep going. But all of us here, and I'm not even going to ask because I know it, all of us have invested in ourselves. We have educated ourselves. We have spent tens of thousands of dollars learning the process, seeing how it goes, keep in touch with the market, talk to the people, start a podcast, invite guests every week, whatever it is. And so for those who are starting the year 2024, which is all of you listening, remember that the first investment you need to make is not a duplex, is not a sixplex, is in yourself. Because the first part to train is right in there.
It's your brain.
Is your brain. You've got to learn. Learn from other people's mistake. Learn from other people's experiences. And now on this final note, I really want to thank all of you again. Thank you for joining today. Wish you all a very, very, very good year 2024. And we'll be at the end of 2024 talking about it again and summarizing. So thank you. And for all those listening, once again, share this episode with a friend who could benefit. It can be inspired by this conversation. Thank you. Research your market, make some offers. Talk to you next week.